The queen demands satisfaction and the human slave is her last hope. The imperial throne room stretched before her like a cathedral of violet crystal, and the air hummed with the electric tension of a court holding its breath. Queen Zalara sat upon her throne carved from a single piece of midnight stone, and her 4 eyes gleamed with barely contained fury. Beneath her, the assembled nobles of the Crixian Empire watched in silence, their own multiple eyes reflecting the fear that permeated the chamber. The queen was dying, not in the way her enemies had hoped through assassination or warfare, but through something far more insidious and humiliating, a biological curse that her own physicians could not cure for 3 cycles. Now the poison had worked its way through her system, slowly shutting down her organs one by one. The best doctors in 7-star systems had examined her, and all had come to the same conclusion: without the rare enzyme found only in compatible genetic material, she would be dead within the lunar cycle. The problem was simple and impossible. No Crixian male possessed the right genetic markers. The compatibility was 0 across her entire species. Enter the human. His name was Danny Cooper, and he stood in the corner of the throne room wearing the simple gray cloth that marked him as property. His brown hair fell across his forehead, and his green eyes took in everything with the quiet intelligence that had kept him alive for 2 years since his capture. The Crixians had taken him from a mining colony on the edge of explored space along with 40 other humans. Most of those humans were dead, now worked to death in the uranium mines or killed for sport. Danny survived because he learned quickly and kept his head down, but now his head was very much up because the queen was staring directly at him. Chancellor Vexer, a tall Crixian with scales that shimmered like oil slicks, stepped forward. His voice was smooth and calculated as he addressed, "The court, we have exhausted all options within our species." The Chancellor announced, his words echoing off the crystalline walls. "The quantum biological scan has revealed only one compatible donor in the entire sector." The crowd murmured their voices, creating a susurrus of disbelief. A human Vexer continued and gestured toward Danny. The throne room erupted into chaos. Nobles shouted in outrage, their translators struggling to keep up with the rapid-fire insults and protests. A human was barely considered sentient by Crixian standards. They were seen as useful labor. Nothing more. The idea that one could save their queen was beyond comprehension. Silence. Queen Zalara's voice cut through the noise like a blade forged in starfire. She rose from her throne, her 7-foot frame towering over even the tallest of her subjects. Her skin was the color of deep space, flecked with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with her heartbeat. Right now those patterns flickered with anger and something else, desperation. She descended the stairs with deliberate grace, each step clicking against the stone. Her eyes never left Danny, and he found himself unable to look away. There was something in her gaze that was different from the other Crixians he had encountered. She looked at him not as a thing but as a person. "You are the human called Danny Cooper." Her voice was quieter now, meant only for him, though the entire court could hear in the vast chamber. "Use your majesty." Danny replied, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his gut. He had learned early that showing weakness to the Crixians was a death sentence. "Do you understand what is being asked of you?" Danny glanced at Chancellor Vexer, who wore an expression of thinly veiled disgust, then back at the queen. "You need something from me, something biological that will cure your poisoning." The queen tilted her head, a gesture that in Crixian culture indicated surprise. "You are more perceptive than I was told." Danny allowed himself a small smile. Survival requires paying attention. For a moment something passed between them, an understanding perhaps, or recognition that they were both trapped by circumstances beyond their control. The queen needed him to live. Danny needed her alive to have any chance of survival himself. Without her protection, the nobles would tear him apart the moment they had the opportunity. "The procedure is complex," Zalara said, turning to address her court as much as Danny. "A genetic transfer that will introduce the necessary enzymes into my system. It will take several weeks of close proximity, and the human must remain healthy throughout." And after, Chancellor Vexer asked the question hanging in the air like a knife. "After," the queen said softly, "I will grant him his freedom." The throne room exploded again. This was too much, not only to rely on a human but to reward one with liberty. It violated every principle of Crixian superiority. Several nobles began shouting at once, demanding alternative solutions, suggesting they simply let their queen die rather than submit to such humiliation. Danny watched Zalara face as the insults and protests washed over her, and he saw something he did not expect: vulnerability. The most powerful being in this sector of space was completely at the mercy of her own people, and they were failing her. He made a decision that would change everything. "I will do it," Danny said loudly enough to be heard over the commotion. "But I have conditions." The silence that followed was absolute. Vexor looked like he might have a stroke. His scales shifting through colors that Danny had learned meant extreme agitation. The queen, however, studied him with renewed interest. "You dare to make demands?" "Slave," Vexor hissed. Danny ignored him, keeping his eyes on Zalara. "I am to save your life. I want more than just my freedom. I want freedom for every human in this empire. I want our ships returned and safe passage to human space. And I want a treaty guaranteeing that the Crixian Empire will never take human slaves again." The audacity of it left the nobles speechless. Even Zalara seemed taken aback, her bioluminescent patterns flickering rapidly through several colors. Danny knew he was gambling with his life, but he also knew leverage when he had it. "You would let your queen die to negotiate for your species?" Vexor demanded. "No," Danny replied calmly. "I would use the only bargaining chip I will ever have to free my people." "Your queen is wise enough to see the difference." Zalara descended the final steps until she stood directly before him, close enough that Danny could smell the ozone scent that seemed to surround all Crixians. She was nearly 2 feet taller than him and could have killed him with one hand. But in that moment they were equals. "You assume I will agree to such terms?" Danny met her four-eyed gaze without flinching. "I assume you want to live. And I assume you are intelligent enough to recognize that keeping humans as slaves has cost you more than it has benefited you. The rebellions, the sabotage, the constant security issues. We are not worth the trouble we cause." A long moment passed. The entire court seemed to hold its breath. Chancellor Vexor began, but Zalara raised one clawed hand for silence. "The human makes a valid argument. We have lost more resources suppressing human resistance than we have gained from their labor." And she paused, her eyes never leaving Danny's face. "He has something I need." "You cannot seriously be considering this, Vexor," protested. "I am not considering it," Zalara said, and Danny felt his heart sink. "I am accepting his terms." The throne room erupted into chaos again, but Zalara ignored it completely. She extended one hand toward Danny, a formal gesture in Crixian culture that indicated a binding agreement. "You will save my life and I will free your people. We will draft a treaty, and when I am cured it will be enacted. Do we have a cord?" Danny looked at her hand, at the claws that could slice through steel, at the alien features that his captors had taught him to fear. And then he looked into her eyes and saw something he never expected to find in a Crixian honor. He took her hand. "We have a cord." What Danny did not know was that the genetic transfer process would require him to live in the Queen's private chambers, that it would involve daily treatments that grew increasingly intimate. As his biology adapted to provide what she needed, he did not know that spending weeks in close quarters with Zalara would reveal her to be nothing like the tyrant he had expected, and he certainly did not know that saving her life would put them both in the crosshairs of a conspiracy that threatened to tear the Empire apart. But he was about to learn all of these things. The first night in the Queen's chambers, Danny stood by the massive window that looked out over the capital city of Kroxar. Towers of crystal and metal stretched toward the purple sky, and ships moved between them like schools of luminous fish. It was beautiful in an alien way. And for the first time in 2 years, Danny was not in chains. The chambers themselves were vast, larger than any space Danny had occupied since his capture. The walls were covered in flowing script that he could not read, and the furniture was all scaled for someone Zalara's size, which meant the chairs were too tall and the bed was enormous. A team of physicians had arrived shortly after they entered, running scans and taking samples from both Danny and the Queen. "The process starts tomorrow," one of the physicians explained. "Through a translator device, you will receive injections that will stimulate your body to produce elevated levels of the required enzymes. Then the Queen will receive transfusions of your blood plasma. The treatment must continue daily for at least 20 cycles. Will it hurt?" Danny asked. The physician regarded him with three of his eyes. The fourth was focused on a holographic display for you. Yes, for Her Majesty more so. But both of you will survive. Probably, Danny muttered after the physicians left. Probably, Zalara agreed from behind him, making him jump. He had not heard her approach. You did not ask if the treatment was dangerous before you agreed to it. Danny turned to face her. She had removed the ornate armor she wore in court and now wore something simpler. A flowing robe that somehow made her seem less alien and more approachable. Would it have changed my answer? No, Zalara said simply. Which is, why you interest me. Most beings, when offered a chance at survival, will take it regardless of cost. But you negotiated not for yourself, but for others. Why? Danny considered the question. It was strange having a conversation with her as if they were equals rather than master and slave. Because I have seen what slavery does to people. It strips away everything that makes them human, and I refuse to escape while leaving others behind. You knew the others in the mining colony. Danny nodded. Some of them. My friend Lisa was there. She died 3 months ago in a tunnel collapse. The Crixian overseers would not pay for proper support beams because human lives were cheaper than materials. I am sorry, Zalara said, and Danny was shocked to realize she meant it. Why? Danny asked, the anger he usually kept buried rising to the surface. Why now? Why show compassion now, when your people have killed and enslaved thousands of humans for years? Because, Zalara said quietly. I was not dying before. She moved to the window standing beside him and looking out at her city. When you believe yourself invincible, it is easy to ignore the suffering of others. You tell yourself they are lesser, that they do not feel pain the way you do, that their lives have less value. These are lies we tell ourselves to justify cruelty. But when you face your own mortality, she turned to look at him. You realize that pain is universal, and that every life is precious because it is finite. Danny studied her face, trying to reconcile this thoughtful being with the empire that had enslaved him. Will your people really let you free? Zalara's expression darkened. The treaty will be honored because I will enforce it. But there will be resistance. Chancellor Vexer and his faction see humans as resources to be exploited. They will not give up that exploitation easily. So we saved your life and you saved ours. And now we both have enemies. Precisely, Zalara said, with something that might have been a smile. And that Danny Cooper is why we must trust each other. The conspiracy against me began before my poisoning. In fact, I believe the poisoning itself was part of it. You think someone in your court poisoned you? I know they did, Zalara said grimly. The toxin used was Traxian Shadow, venom extremely rare and extremely illegal in the Empire. Only someone with significant resources and connections could have obtained it. Why poison you slowly? Why not just assassinate you outright? Because a sudden death would trigger immediate investigations and security protocols, but a slow poisoning from an exotic disease. Zalara shook her head. It was clever. If I had died from the illness, civil war would have erupted. The Empire would have torn itself apart over succession. And in that chaos, certain nobles could have seized power, nobles like Vexer among others. There is a faction that believes the Empire has grown too soft. They want to expand our borders, to conquer and enslave more species, to return to the ways of our ancestors, and my policies of limited engagement and diplomatic relations have made me their enemy. Danny processed this information, realizing that the situation was far more complex than he had understood. So by saving you, I have made myself a target. Zalara met his eyes. Yeah, and I apologize for that. I should have warned you before you agreed to the terms, but selfishly I wanted to live. And I wanted to believe that perhaps one good thing could come from this empire freeing your people. The honesty in her voice surprised Danny. He had spent 2 years thinking of the Crixians as monsters incapable of self-reflection or remorse. But Zalara was neither of those things. She was a leader trying to hold together a crumbling empire while dying from poison and facing conspirators. At every turn we will both survive this, Danny said with more confidence than he felt. And we will free my people, and if Vexer or anyone else tries to stop us, they will learn that humans are a lot tougher than they think. Zalara luminescent patterns pulsed with what Danny was learning to recognize as amusement. I believe you, Danny Cooper, I believe you. The first treatment began the next morning. Danny lay on a medical platform while Crixian physicians attached various tubes and sensors to his The lead physician Dr. Kelrax explained the process through the translator. Your body naturally produces several enzymes that are genetically similar to what the Queen needs. However, you do not produce them in sufficient quantities. We are going to inject you with a catalyst that will increase production by approximately 3,000%. Danny winced. That sounds painful. It will be uncomfortable. Kelrax agreed. In the way doctors everywhere minimize suffering, the catalyst will cause fever, muscle aches, and nausea. These symptoms will last approximately 6 hours after each treatment. How many treatments? 20 minimum, possibly more, depending on how the Queen responds. Danny looked over at Zalara, who was being prepared by her own team of physicians. She caught his eye and gave him a slight nod of encouragement. Let's get started, Danny said. The injection burned like fire, spreading through his veins within minutes. Danny was sweating and shaking as his body went into overdrive, producing the enzymes Zalara needed. He gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out even as every muscle in his body cramped simultaneously. The human is in distress, one of the physicians noted clinically. He is tolerating the treatment within acceptable parameters, Kelrax replied. Give him something for the fever, Danny. Barely felt the second injection, too focused on breathing through the pain. He closed his eyes and tried to think of anything else. Memories of Earth, of his sister Kate, who he had not seen in 3 years, of the coffee shop where he used to work before signing up for the mining colony. A cool hand touched his forehead and Danny opened his eyes to find Zalara standing beside his platform. She had left her own treatment station to check on him. Breathe slowly, she instructed, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Focus on the rhythm, Danny. Followed her instructions and found that it helped marginally. The pain was still intense, but having something to concentrate on made it bearable. Why are you helping me? He managed to ask through clenched teeth. Because you are doing this for me, Zalara said simply. Because you are in pain. Because of my need. And she hesitated. Because I do not want you to suffer alone. They stayed like that for the next hour. Zalara hand on Danny's forehead, coaching him through breathing exercises while his body rebelled against the treatment. The Crixian physicians seemed uncomfortable with their Queen attendance on a human slave, but none dared to comment. Finally, the worst of it passed. Danny's fever broke and the muscle cramps eased to a dull ache. He felt exhausted, like he had run a marathon while carrying a boulder. How do you feel? Kelrax asked. Like I got hit by a transport ship, Danny muttered. But alive, good, because we need to begin the transfusion now while the enzyme levels are at their peak. Danny turned his head to watch as the physicians connected a tube from his arm to a machine that would filter and process his blood plasma before transferring it to Zalara. The Queen had returned to her own platform and now lay waiting for the treatment that might save her life. The transfusion took 2 hours, during which Danny drifted in and out of consciousness. When he finally woke fully, the physicians were disconnecting the equipment, and Zalara was sitting up on her platform looking slightly stronger already. Did it work? Danny asked. Kelrax studied his holographic displays. The enzyme levels in Her Majesty blood have increased by 40%. This is excellent progress. We will repeat the treatment tomorrow. Tomorrow. Danny groaned. Every day for 20 days, Kelrax confirmed. Unless you wish to stop. No, Danny said firmly. We keep going. Zalara caught his eye across the medical bay and he saw gratitude there mixed with respect. It occurred to Danny that perhaps no one had ever willingly suffered for her before, that being Queen meant everyone expected her to sacrifice for them, but never the reverse. The physicians left, them alone to recover. Danny managed to sit up despite the protest from every muscle in his body. He found a chair that was almost human-sized and collapsed into it. That was horrible, he announced. Zalara made a sound that might have been a laugh. Yes, it was, and you did not complain once. I complained the entire time in my head. Then you are braver than most who would have complained aloud. Zalara said. She moved to stand by the window again, looking out at her city. It is strange, she mused. I have led armies into battle, faced down assassination attempts, and negotiated with hostile alien species. But lying on that platform waiting to see if your gift would work. That was the most frightened I have been in years. Because you were helpless. Danny said, understanding for all your power. You had to rely on someone else completely. Yes, Zalara turned to face him. And for someone who has been self-sufficient since birth, who was raised to never show weakness or need, that is terrifying. And she smiled, slightly even more terrifying when the person you must rely on is a human slave with every reason to let you die. The thought crossed my mind. Danny admitted, but you did not act on it. No, because Danny considered his words carefully, because revenge does not bring back the dead, and because you are not the one who enslaved me. You are just the one who has the power to free us, and that is worth saving. Over the following days, a routine developed each morning. Danny would endure the catalyst injection, and the hours of agony that followed, then the transfusion which left him weak and dizzy. Then both he and Zalara would spend the afternoons recovering, discussing everything from Rixian history to human culture, to their respective childhoods. Danny learned that Zalara had not wanted to be queen, that she had been thrust into the role at age 16, when her mother was killed in a coup. She had spent the last 20 years trying to reform an empire built on conquest and slavery, fighting against nobles who profited from the old way. Zalara learned that Danny had been a student before the colony, that he had studied xenobiology, ironically enough, and had joined the mining expedition to pay off student debt. His sister Kate was still on Earth working as a teacher, and she had no idea if he was alive or dead. They played strategy games on holographic boards and argued about philosophy and art. Zalara showed him Crixian poetry, which when translated had a haunting beauty to it. Danny taught her about Earth music and was endlessly amused when she developed a fondness for classical composers. On the 8th day, Chancellor Vexer requested an audience. The Queen sat on a smaller throne in her private receiving room with Danny standing beside her, rather than kneeling at her feet. As protocol demanded, the message was clear. They were allies, not master and slave. Vexer's scales rippled with barely contained anger when he saw the arrangement. Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. Danny present, Zalara asked. Or my recovery? Vexer ignored the question. The council grows restless. There are rumors that you plan to honor the agreement with the human. It is not a rumor. Vexer, it is fact. When my treatment is complete, I will free all humans held by the Empire. You cannot. The economic impact alone will be absorbed. Zalara said coldly. We will adapt as we did when we ended the practice of consuming sentient species, as we did when we stopped using children as soldiers. The Empire has committed many atrocities, Chancellor, and it is past time we atoned for them. You speak of morality. Vexer spat. But morality is a luxury of the strong. We enslaved humans because we could, because they are weak. Danny spoke up before Zalara could respond. We destroyed 3 of your mining facilities last year, staged uprisings in 12 colonies, and cost your empire more resources in security and damage control than we produced. In labor, that is not weakness, Chancellor, that is asymmetric warfare. We just refuse to die quietly. Vexer turned his 4 eyes on Danny, and the hatred there was palpable. You are a parasite that has infected our queen with soft-minded idealism. When she is cured, she will see reason. No, Zalara said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. When I am cured, I will be stronger than ever. And the first thing I will do is investigate who poisoned me. And Danny Cooper is not making me soft, Vexer. He is showing me what honor looks like, something you seem to have forgotten. The threat hung in the air. Vexer's face went through several color changes before settling on a sickly gray. As you command, Your Majesty, he said stiffly, and left the room with barely concealed fury. He is going to try to kill us, Danny observed once the Chancellor was gone. Zalara agreed. Which is why I have assigned additional guards to these chambers and why you should start carrying this. She handed him a small device that looked like a metal cylinder. What is it? A personal shield generator. It will deflect energy weapons and slow down physical attacks. It is not perfect, but it might save your life. Press the button on top to activate it. Danny clipped the device to his belt. Have I mentioned that your court is terrifying? Daily, Zalara said with grim humor. That night, Danny woke to the sound of his door opening. He grabbed the shield generator and pressed the button just as a figure lunged toward him with a blade. The shield activated with a hum, and the knife skidded off the energy field. Danny rolled out of bed and shouted for help. The assassin recovered quickly and pulled out an energy pistol. But before he could fire, Zalara burst through the connecting door between their chambers. She moved with terrifying speed, grabbing the assassin and throwing him across the room with enough force to crack the wall. Guards poured in moments later, subduing the would-be killer. Zalara ordered them to take him for interrogation, then turned to Danny. "Are you injured?" "No, the shield worked." Danny's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. That was too close. "This was a test," Zalara said grimly. "Vexor, or whoever is behind this, wanted to see if we were truly protected. Now they know." Danny looked at the assassin being dragged away. "What happens to him? He will be questioned and then executed," Zalara said without emotion. "Attempted assassination of a member of the royal household is a capital offense." "Member of the royal household," Danny repeated. "As of tonight, you are under my personal protection with all the rights and privileges that entails, including the right to carry weapons, to command guards, and to speak with my authority." She met his eyes. "You are no longer a slave, Danny Cooper. You are my ally and my friend, and anyone who tries to harm you will answer to me." The formal declaration sent ripples through the court. By the next morning, everyone knew that the human had been elevated to a position of power. It was unprecedented, scandalous, and exactly what Zalara intended. "She is drawing a line in the sand," Danny said as they prepared for the 10th treatment, forcing everyone to choose a side. "Yes," Zalara confirmed, "and many will choose poorly." The treatment had become routine in its horror. Danny endured the pain, Zalara received the transfusion, and both of them spent the afternoons recovering. But today felt different. There was a tension in the air, like a storm about to break. Dr. Kelrax completed his scans and looked puzzled. "Interesting," he muttered. "What is it?" Zalara asked. "The enzyme integration is accelerating. Somehow, your body is not just accepting the foreign proteins, it is learning to produce them. On its own, this should not be possible with Crixian biology." "Unless," Danny said slowly, "my biology is affecting hers. It's not just a one-way transfer." Kelrax adjusted his instruments. "The human may be correct. We are seeing genetic markers in Her Majesty, cells that were not there before. Human markers. Is that dangerous?" Kelrax hesitated. "Unknown. This has never been documented before. We are in uncharted territory." Zalara and Danny exchanged glances. "Do we stop?" Zalara asked. "No," Danny said. "If it is working, we keep going, whatever the risks." "Are you certain? Because if something goes wrong, then we deal with it together," Danny said firmly. "We have come this far. We see it through." On the 15th day, Zalara stood without assistance for the first time in weeks. Her bioluminescent patterns glowed brighter, and the gray pallor that had haunted her features was gone. She looked vital and powerful. "It is working," Kelrax announced with something like awe in Her Majesty's current condition. "I estimate full recovery within another 5 treatments." The news spread through the palace, and with it came the realization that Zalara would soon be strong enough to enforce her will. Absolutely, Vexor faction knew their window was closing. The coup attempt came on the 18th. Danny was in the training room practicing with the weapons Zalara guards had taught him to use when alarms started blaring throughout the palace. Guards rushed past, shouting about a breach in the north wing. Danny ran towards Zalara Chambers, his heart in his throat. He found her surrounded by her personal guards, facing down a group of heavily armed soldiers, led by Chancellor Vexor. "You are under arrest for crimes against the Empire." Vexor announced, his voice amplified by speakers. "Treason, corruption, and trafficking with inferior species." Zalara laughed, a cold, terrifying sound. "You think you can arrest me in my own palace? Vexor, the council has voted you are no longer fit to rule. Then the council has committed treason," Zalara replied, "and you all will face justice for it." Vexor raised his hand and his soldiers leveled their weapons. "I had hoped to do this cleanly. But if you resist, we will be forced to kill you. Such a tragedy. The illness took you after all." Danny pushed through the guards. "To stand beside Zalara, you will have to go through me," Vexor sneered. "The pet human. How touching. Do you truly believe you matter in this?" Danny activated his shield and drew the plasma pistol Zalara had given him. "I believe that I am not a pet. I am a soldier, and I am standing between you and someone I care about, so yes, I matter." "Fire," Vexor commanded. The hallway erupted into chaos. Energy blasts filled the air, and Danny's shield flared as shots bounced off it. Zalara's own shields activated, and she returned fire with devastating accuracy. Her personal guards engaged Vexor soldiers in close combat, and the elegant palace corridor became a war zone. Danny took down 2 soldiers with precise shots exactly as he had been trained. Then, a massive explosion rocked the palace, throwing everyone to the ground. Danny's ears rang and he tasted blood when he looked up. He saw Zalara struggling to her feet, facing Vexor, who had drawn a massive blade yield. Vexor demanded, "Your guards are defeated. Your palace is surrounded. Surrender now, and I will make your death quick, Zalara." Bioluminescent patterns flashed with rage. "I am the queen of the Crixian Empire, and I do not yield to traitors." They charged at each other, and Dani could only watch in horror as they fought. Zalara was still weak from her illness, not at full strength, but she moved with practiced skill, blocking Vexor strikes and countering with her own. But Vexor was fresh and determined. He landed a hit that sent Zalara crashing into a wall, then raised his blade for a killing blow. "No!" Dani screamed and fired his pistol. The shot caught Vexor in the shoulder, spinning him around. Dani fired again and again until the Chancellor fell. Zalara guards rushed forward, securing the wounded. Traitor Zalara pulled herself up, blood dripping from a cut on her face. "Dani Cooper," she said, her voice hoarse. "You just saved my life. You saved mine first." Dani replied, helping her stand. "Besides, we have a treaty to uphold." Reinforcements arrived, then loyal guards who had been fighting Vexor forces throughout the palace. Within hours, the coup was crushed. The conspirators were rounded up and order was restored. Zalara addressed her court from her throne, still bearing her wounds like badges of honor. "Today you witnessed an attempt to overthrow your queen," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the throne room. "Chancellor Vexor and his allies sought to murder me and return this empire to the dark ages of unlimited conquest and slavery. They failed," and she looked directly at Dani. "They failed in part because a human, a species we considered inferior, showed more courage and honor than those who called themselves nobles." The court was silent. "Vexor poisoned me," she continued. "He wanted me to die slowly while he consolidated power. But he made a mistake. He underestimated both my will to survive and the value of an ally chosen not for their species, but for their character. And Dani Cooper has proven himself worthy of far more than freedom." Zalara stood and descended from her throne to stand before. "Dani, kneel," she commanded softly. Dani dropped to one knee, uncertain what was happening. Zalara drew a ceremonial blade and touched it to each of his shoulders. "I name you Dani Cooper, ambassador of humanity to the Crixian Empire with full diplomatic status and all rights therein. You speak for your people with my blessing, and your voice carries the weight of this throne." She sheathed the blade and offered her hand. "Rise, ambassador." Dani stood slowly, trying to process what had just happened. "But the treaty will be honored," Zalara confirmed. "In fact, you are uniquely positioned to negotiate its terms and ensure its enforcement. No one can claim the agreement is unfair when a human helped draft it." Over the following weeks, the treaty took shape. Dani worked with Crixian legal experts to create a framework for human freedom, repatriation of slaves, and guarantees against future enslavement. It was complex, difficult work, made harder by nobles who tried to insert loopholes and exceptions. But Dani was relentless, and with Zalara backing, he got everything his people needed. The final treatment came on the 22nd day. Dr. Kelrax completed his scans and nodded in satisfaction. "Her Majesty is cured, the toxins are completely eliminated, and her body is now producing the necessary enzymes independently." Zalara stood and stretched, her movements fluid and powerful once more. "I feel reborn," she said, then looked at Dani. "And I owe that rebirth to you." Dani smiled. "We both survived, and our people are free. I would say that is a fair trade." The treaty was signed in a ceremony broadcast across the Empire. Humans throughout Crixian space were given ships and supplies to return home, or if they chose to stay with full citizenship and rights. Dani watched as families were reunited, as people who had been property became persons again. Kate was among the first ships to arrive. She barely recognized her brother when she saw him standing beside an alien queen, wearing the formal robes of an ambassador. "Dani," she cried, running to embrace him. "I thought you were dead," almost, Dani said, hugging her tightly. "But I had help." He introduced Kate to Zalara and watched as his sister struggled to reconcile the monster she had been taught to fear with the being who had given her brother safety and purpose. "You saved him," Kate said to Zalara. "We saved each other," Zalara replied. In the months that followed, Dani established the first human embassy on Croxar, working to build bridges between species that had been enemies. He brought human culture to the Crixians and learned more about their own history and traditions. Slowly, trust began to form. Zalara implemented sweeping reforms, using the momentum from her survival to push through changes. The empire became more diplomatic, less focused on conquest. Several other enslaved species were freed following the human example, and the Crixian Empire began its transformation from conquerors to partners. On the anniversary of the treaty signing, Danny and Zalara stood together on the palace balcony watching fireworks explode across the purple sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Danny asked the changes. "The resistance from the nobles giving up so much power?" "Ever," Zalara said firmly, then added, "Though, I will confess I did not expect it to be so difficult. Changing an empire is harder than ruling one." Danny laughed. "Yes, but you are doing it. And that is what matters." Zalara bioluminescent patterns pulsed with warmth. "I could not have done it without you, Danny Cooper. You came to me as a slave and became the catalyst for everything that followed." Danny looked out at the city, at the humans and Crixians moving freely together, something that would have been impossible a year ago. "We both changed." He said, "You needed me to survive and I needed you to free my people. But somewhere along the way it became more than that." Yes, Zalara agreed quietly, it did. They stood in comfortable silence watching the celebration below. Two beings from different worlds who had found common ground in the most unlikely circumstances. Danny thought about the journey from that first moment in the throne room, when he had gambled his life on Zalara honor, to this moment where they stood as friends and allies. The empire still faced challenges. There were nobles who resisted change, human colonies that struggled to trust their former captors, and political factions that wanted to return to the old ways. But Danny and Zalara faced each challenge together, building something new from the ashes of the old empire. Months turned to years. Danny's sister Kate joined him as a cultural liaison, helping humans adjust to freedom and teaching Crixians about humanity. She and Dr. Kelrax began working together on medical exchanges that benefited both species. Vexer and his co-conspirators were tried and sentenced. The trial revealed the full extent of the conspiracy, how they had planned to use Zalara death to trigger a civil war and seize power in the chaos there. Defeat became a symbol of the new empire values: justice over power, honor over expediency. Danny received news from Earth. His family wanted him to come home, but he found he could not leave. Not yet. There was still too much work to do. Too many bridges to build, and if he was honest with himself, he had found a home here among the aliens he once feared. Zalara noticed his hesitation when the invitation from Earth arrived. "You should go," she said. "They are your family." "So are you," Danny replied simply, "and this is my home now, if that is acceptable." Zalara bioluminescent patterns flashed with pleasure. "More than acceptable, Ambassador Cooper." They continued their work, building alliances with other species, mediating disputes, and slowly spreading the principles of freedom and cooperation throughout the sector. The Crixian Empire became known not for its military might, but for its diplomacy. Of years after the signing of the treaty, a human Crixian joint colony was established on a neutral world. It became a model for cooperation, with both species working together to build something neither could have created. Alone, Danny and Zalara attended the opening ceremony and saw children, both human and Crixian, playing together without fear or prejudice. "This is what we fought for," Zalara said, watching the children. Yes, Danny agreed, and it was worth every moment of pain, every risk. Zalara turned to him. "I have been meaning to ask you something, Danny Cooper. In all this time building this new empire together, I have never heard you speak of what you want for yourself. You freed your people, reformed an empire, established peace. But what do you want?" Danny considered the question carefully. "I want to continue this work with you. I want to see how far we can take this dream of cooperation. I want to prove that species that were enemies can become partners." And he met her four-eyed gaze steadily. "I want to stay here by your side for as long as you will have." Zalara reached out and took his hand, a gesture that no longer seemed strange after years of friendship. "Then stay, Danny Cooper, stay and help me build an empire worthy of its people, all its people." And so he did. Danny Cooper, former slave turned ambassador, continued his work alongside Queen Zalara, architect of the new Crixian Empire. They faced challenges and setbacks, victories and defeats, but they faced them together. The empire that had once conquered now cooperated. The species that had enslaved now freed, and at the center of it all stood a human and a Crixian who had proven that even the deepest divides could be bridged by courage, honor, and mutual respect. Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of the Crixian Empire, they would point to many factors: political pressure, economic necessity, and social evolution. But those who were there knew the truth. It began with a dying queen who chose honor over pride, and a human slave who chose mercy over vengeance. It began with two people who saw past their differences, to their shared humanity even when one of them was not human at all, and in seeing each other truly. They changed the galaxy, the end.